Hello, BookTube, and welcome to ShakeTube 2018. We are plowing our way through the month of September. Me and a bunch of other booktubers are doing a month-long celebration of all things Shakespeare, and we're doing it in a different way than read-alongs typically are conducted, where each channel, each person, each booktuber is concentrating on different things about Shakespeare. The sonnets, different sets of plays, different emphases all along, so that you can sort of pick a la carte what you feel like watching and not. I would hope that you're watching everything that has ShakeTube in the title. But for my sake, when I was thinking about the approach I wanted to take this year, because of course I was an ardent follower of ShakeTube last year, the approach I wanted to take this year was to sort of stress, in the plays that I've been looking at, the joys and benefits of rereading Shakespeare. The joys and benefits of going at plays that are extremely well known, well anthologized, reprinted everywhere, even performed a lot. So I picked big ones this time around. And this week, the final play that I will be doing for ShakeTube 2018 is Henry V, which is not only often revived, despite the fact that it's a fairly big undertaking for a regional Shakespeare company to do, but also there have been Hollywood productions. There have been big screen productions that are, a couple of which are extremely famous. The Laurence Olivier version and the Kenneth Branagh version are both famous, and justly so. They're both, in their own way, magnificent versions, realizations of the play. I am, I think, in the minority who believes that the Kenneth Branagh version is much better than the Olivier version, that it's in fact a magnificent adaptation of a Shakespeare play to the screen, to a screenplay, to the world of movie making. But the ambitious part, the part that the reason why, if you are in Lower Oxnard and you have a local Shakespeare company that has a budget of $2,000 and 4 people who really love playing Shakespeare but aren't in any way theatricals, they're just siding salesmen who happen to have time off for rehearsals, you often won't see the history plays at all, because despite the fact that, rather ironically, the introduction, the chorus that introduces this play famously, begins with "Oh, for a muse of fire." The chorus is introducing the play by apologizing, by saying this is a massive dynastic struggle and a historical epic that we're going to perform on stage here for you in the next 2 hours, but we can't do it. So we're apologizing ahead of time. We've only got a handful of people. We've got a stage. We've got props. And we've got backdrops. And they're going to have to do for the vasty fields of France. They're going to have to make do. Your imagination will just have to do the rest. Despite that prologue, theatrical companies have often made a big deal out of this play. I have seen it done both. I have seen it done with a cast of thousands on stage. I've also seen it done more recently, very intentionally, with Spartan minimalism. And I have to say, ordinarily, I am a big fan of Shakespearean stage etiquette that removes the falderal. I think these plays can survive almost anything. So, ordinarily, I'm a big fan of Spartan staging styles. But I've never seen a Spartan staging of Henry V that actually works. If you take away the crowds and the armor and the elaborate backdrops and whatnot, the play starts to change, I think. What you're watching starts to change, and not in a good way, but one way or another. You will have certainly read it, or seen the Kenneth Branagh version, in class, or something like that. Henry V is a popular play. And when I was reading it for ShakeTube this time around, the question that kept coming back to my mind is why? Why is it a popular play? I understand why it got huge currency during World War II, for instance, because it has patriotic apostrophes all throughout it. It has patriotic, soaring, melodramatic moments all throughout it that would play well to an audience that felt itself under siege, or that felt a British audience that felt a need to seize on that national identity. But other than that, other than something like that, I'm not really sure. I've been crawling through the play, line by line, scene by scene, even from the very beginning, trying to figure out the appeal here, because this play has been hugely popular even before Laurence Olivier came along. You wouldn't have wanted to tell him that, but still, it's true. And the reasons that are against that, I think, are manifold. There are quite a few reasons why I would think this wouldn't be a popular play. For instance, it's very obviously a sequel, and not just a part 2. This is like coming in cold to the Marvel Cinematic Universe in Captain America: Civil War, or you know, the Age of Ultron, where you would look at it, if you plopped in completely cold, you'd say, well, who the hell are these people? What's the deal with these two? Why are they have a significant silent moment? What's going on here? I think you would perhaps miss a lot if you did that. I don't actually know anyone who came in cold to the Marvel Cinematic Universe in either of those movies. And those movies, in addition to not really slowing down much to give you a basic primer on what they're doing, they very much reward the people who've been there all along. What's now called fan service is all throughout those movies. And it's all throughout this play as well. This is not a part 2 or a part 3 of anything. It's a standalone thing, and you have to assume that the people who are going to see this play back when Shakespeare wrote it would be familiar with their Holinshed, same as he is, same as where he gets all his information. They'd be familiar with the story. It would be, you know, currency in their own families late at night when they're talking and when they're remembering family stories. Even so, we start off right away with the clergy, the higher clergy of England, worrying because there's a bill pending that would drink deep of church coffers. But while they're worrying about that bill, they're also talking about the king who is now Henry V. They're talking about what he was like when he was the prince, when he was the heir apparent, but he was not yet king. And when he was, we get the impression, if you know nothing else, if you come to this cold, we get the strong impression in their comments that he was very different. Now, that's fascinating in its own right, that this character he doesn't stride on stage first thing in the first, you know, scene of the first act like in some other history plays. Instead, we hear about him. And that's interesting in its own way, that we're apparently dealing with a main character who has undergone a radical change. But I can't help but think that it would be more satisfying to theatergoers who had been through the parts of Henry IV and seen the prince, and seen the famous scenes with Falstaff and whatnot, and seen the scenes where he's roistering around with the lower element in town and country and garrison, while all the time keeping a reserve to himself. We watch those scenes in Henry IV, and we see, okay, so this person might be very different when he comes to the throne. Now we're getting the fulfillment of that. He has achieved the throne, and he is very different. And I don't know. I think that those of you, if any of you are reading this for ShakeTube for the first time, without having read the Henry IV parts, or the Merry Wives of Windsor, or anything like that, I'd love to know if that hurt your reading, or if it whetted your appetite to meet this person. And when we finally do meet Henry, in the famous throne room scene where he invites two groups of people in. He invites those same clerics and asks them to go over one more time for him the case for whether or not he is actually the rightful heir to the throne of France, in addition to his own kingdom. But when they're done, they have a wonderful twisty-turny legalese pile of mumbo-jumbo that they assert for him and then say that it's as plain as day. And while they're doing that, while they're asserting his case for him, they're also repeating directly to his face that he has greatly changed, that he is not the person they knew. And no sooner do they finish than the scene introduces an ambassador from France with a message from the Dauphin, from the heir apparent in France, who was up until just recently a counterpart to Henry. And the prince's gift is not well received. He sends Henry a box of tennis balls, which I'm not 100% sure the joke really lands today, because today in Flushing Meadows for the U.S. Open, you have well-trained cyborgs, earning millions of dollars even to lose at the U.S. Open. The loser wins millions of dollars. And the creatures that go out on that court, they have been genetically engineered. They can see a fly's wing moving in air. When they serve a tennis ball across the net to their opponent, it strikes the clay or the grass or the dirt, depending on what event you're at. It strikes the grass at 195 miles an hour, which is far, far beyond the non-genetically engineered capabilities of any human being. Their tendons are reinforced with high tensile plastic. They can turn and pivot on a dime. They don't live past the age of 30. They're just these weird genetically engineered creatures who don't think about anything other than that game. So it doesn't feel, when you're watching a tennis tournament and you're seeing these animals brought out of their compounds, put on the court and told, go, do the one and only thing you know how to do, and do it at Klingon levels of ferocity and physical ability. When you watch that, you're not really thinking of it as childish. The jest has lost that bit of its sting, but the jest of the ton of tennis balls in that scene is that it's an allusion to the pastime as sort of an idling thing, a time-wasting thing. And I don't know what you would do now. Bull riding? No, that's a multi-million-dollar sport. Competitive racetrack driving? No, people die at every event. So it's not a childish undertaking at all. I don't really know what you'd do. But one way or another, when that gift is received, I'm not really sure what response the Dauphin was hoping for. I think he was just thinking embarrassment. And perhaps that's what everyone in the court is also thinking will be the reaction, just embarrassment and slight irritation. But instead, it rouses Henry to enormous wrath, and of a different kind of wrath than anyone present suspects that he could do. You get the very strong sensation in that moment that the clergy itself, the bishops who are in the room and who have been just until a moment ago encouraging him to make war in France, you get the impression at that moment that they're a little bit awestruck, maybe even frightened by what they see now. They realize that this is going to happen, that the whole country is going to go to war. This young man is going to take the whole country to war. And of course, in history, that's a stellar campaign. Henry lands a small force in France and has the signature Battle of Agincourt that just changes the nature of European politics for a generation. And that is much studied, a battle that is much studied on its own. But what we're supposed to see here is the fulfillment of a change that we have seen sort of foreshadowed for a long time. If you were a theater goer in London, you would have seen this coming for a long time. You would have been to the earlier plays. Now you're seeing the fulfillment of it, and it works. It really, really works. I don't think that Henry V ever actually gives us much of an insight into Henry. We notoriously almost never see him alone. We notoriously almost never get any kind of speech from him that feels like a soliloquy. In a way, in many ways, he feels like the opposite of Hamlet. All exterior and no interior. But it doesn't seem to matter. The point that I want to make, the main point that I want to make about this play before I shut up and let you fill the comments with your own reactions, is a point that I'm making on both the videos that I'm making today, which is that the fact that this is a sequel is completely counteracted by the fact that this is a play by someone who has really learned what he's doing. If you look, like for instance, one of the joys of rereading is that you can concentrate on little parts of little things. You don't have to gulp down the whole work and figure out how to understand it. You can concentrate on the small stuff. And if you just look at the first, for instance, act of Henry V, and don't pay so much attention to the gorgeous verse, although there are some wonderful, wonderful moments even in that first act, because we see Henry dealing with his counselors, we see him dealing with an international insult from an ambassador, we see him dealing with disloyalty among his own, and all of it is meant to give a portrait of the kind of king that his father was not. which historically I don't think is fair, but still, it's masterfully done. The point is that although this is a sequel, it is you get the feeling right from the beginning when you look at those scenes, there's nothing wasted in them. They are perfectly done, even counterbalancing all of the ground they need to cover with humor. There's wry humor all throughout that a less experienced playwright would probably not have felt comfortable including in such amounts in a big historical, in a big national historical epic like this. The scheming clergymen, the scheming bishops right at the beginning, we see them cloistered and hunkered down, chattering about how much money they stand to lose if this king is not brought to heel. And then they start to talk about his nature and wonder what could possibly have been the reason for the change, and just offhandedly say, well, miracles are ceased, so it has to be some other reason. It can't be that. These are the very bishops of the church, and that's the first thing they say. Well, it can't be a miracle, that's for sure. And the same thing when their long-windedness is mocked. Shakespeare very adroitly mocks their long-windedness out of their own mouths without them knowing it, and that's also wonderful. And also, the humor of the common scenes. We break right away to common people in an inn. People who are going to be soldiers in this war that Henry is going to embark on. And we get the death of Falstaff. The king has killed his heart. And that also is a callback to earlier plays. We don't get Falstaff. We don't get great big scenes with this great big character, the first standout success character that Shakespeare ever made. We don't get that. Instead, you would think that scene would entirely rely on you being familiar with the previous works, but it doesn't. It's incredibly touching anyway. The way it's done is incredibly touching anyway. In other words, despite the fact that Henry V is a sequel, there's expertise written all throughout it that you don't get in Shakespeare's own earlier sequels. This is an author who is learning his craft as he goes along and learning it in great gulps. And I love that. I just, reading it this time around, trying to read it with fresh eyes, which is one of the fun parts of something like ShakeTube, is that when I'm reading these things, I'm thinking about people who are reading these things for the first time, people who are reading it maybe for the second time, but with the first time really as an adult, or stuff like that. And that's wonderful. That exercise in reading these things as if I were just encountering them is wonderful. And that's the sense that I got this time around, is that my main appreciation for Henry V this time around was what a lean and crackling a good job it is, despite the fact that it is, objectively speaking, multiple parts in a series. You wouldn't think it would be this effective. And I'm wondering how effective you found it. I loved it, but I'm also wondering, when you were reading it, are you familiar with either of the two major film productions, Laurence Olivier's or Kenneth Branagh's? And also, a question I've been meaning to ask in all of my ShakeTube videos, I've forgotten every time. I would love it in the comments field if you would all tell me what your local Shakespeare scene is like. What is your Shake scene like? Right where you live. In other words, not a big day trip, not a big endeavor. Right where you live. Is there a Shakespeare company? Is there a theater company that does occasionally Shakespeare? Would you, right where you are, ever have a chance to see Henry V live? I would find that utterly fascinating. Sound off, if you want to, in the comments field. Sound off about that. What is your access to live Shakespeare? Because I think it's an amazing way to see Shakespeare. It feels elitist to say, well, you haven't seen Shakespeare until you've seen him live in the original Klingon. and keep in mind, I don't say that. When I talk about Shakespeare, I always say the same thing. The way to appreciate him is live, but not at a theater. I know most people probably don't have access to a local theater that puts on regular Shakespeare. No, the way to experience him is live with your friends. Get a group of friends together, fill a bowl with snack food, or make sure there's a jug of cheap wine handy, divvy up the parts, and have everybody be characters. Have your friends be characters in a room. It sounds dorky, but I guarantee you, if you do it once, You'll want to go through the whole canon, and not just of Shakespeare. I've known groups that started to do that at my behest and worked their way through Shakespeare, then through Shaw, then through Ibsen. It's tremendously fun, and it really helps with really grabbing these plays. You don't, but anybody can do that. Unless, like me, you don't have any friends. Actually, that's not true. That's not true. According to the UNESCO's latest survey, I have something like 20 billion friends, but none of them can read. I have 20 billion friends on Earth, but none of them can read, so they don't do me any good. But one way or another, leaving that aside for the minute, this Shakespeare, a true Shakespeare read-along, where you've got all your friends in the room and you're all playing characters. Instead, tell me about your Shakespeare situation in your town. Would you ever have a chance to see this play live within walking or easy busing distance of where you are right now? But anyway, one way or another, that brings us to the end of Henry V, and that is the end of my play discussions for ShakeTube 2018. But there is one Saturday left. September has a long length of Saturdays. And that brings us to next week. And next week I will not need this big brick of a book, although boy has it served me. It has served me very well for ShakeTube 2018. I love this edition of the Collected Shakespeares because it's very minimal with notes or supporting material, but I don't really need those anymore. And I love the feel of it, just this big brick of a thing. I reinforced this one many, many times so that it would survive ShakeTube 2018, and I recently found a double of it. So this one, this did survive. This could easily go 2 more years, but I have a double in reserve in case this one falls apart. But I won't be discussing a play next week. Next week I will be closing out ShakeTube 2018, my participation in ShakeTube 2018, but not by discussing a play. Instead, next week I will be discussing the author of the play. Next week I'm going to take on the Shakespeare authorship controversy. Did William Shakespeare of Stratford-on-Avon write these plays that we've been talking about all month long, or did he not? In a 20-minute video, there's no way that I will be able to do the subject justice, but I will cover some basics and raise some questions, and we'll have a chat, and that'll be a lot of fun. That's how I'm going to wrap up ShakeTube 2018, is by bringing the whole thing into question. So I'll see you all then. I'll wrap up this video for now, and we'll come back next week to talk about who this Shakespeare person really is. Won't that be fun? But anyway, sound off in the comments, and I'll see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.